Today I'm just joined by David Hollingsbee of Stoane Lighting. Caught up with David at Light 23 just before Christmas, David, wasn't it, last November? And we just had a really interesting conversation, and I really like a lot of what you guys are doing. I just think that you're pushing sort of boundaries in terms of some of the environmental stuff and the circadian stuff, and there may be more you're doing that you could fill me in on today as well, Dave. But I love your philosophy, so we just said we'd maybe have a chat for half an hour, 40 minutes, and just get a bit more insight into you guys and what you're doing, you know. So yeah, if you want to start off by telling us a little bit about Stoane Lighting, I suppose, and your philosophy.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. It's well, we're an employee-owned company based just outside Edinburgh in Scotland. About 55 of us, normally around about that sort of figure of in-house employees at the time. We've got a network of local subcontractors that we use when for higher volume work and certain specialist bits and pieces. We've been going now for getting on for 30 years. I took over something like 2012. We became employee owned in 2014 when the founder sort of receded back into the shadows. So the majority share is now owned by the staff. We make to order. We make lights to order, largely mostly for the specifier part of the market. Manufacturing projects all over the world, primarily UK and Europe, but that sort of changes year on year. All sorts of sectors. We're known quite a lot for gallery museum work, whether it's track or showcase lighting. We do a lot of heritage stuff, museums, cathedrals, visitor centres, that sort of thing, but also high-end resi, retail. One of the things we're currently known for too, which is big specials, big bespoke items, for feature atriums and that kind of thing, or just taking on niche projects to solve a need. It's all made to order, which means we can be pretty flexible. It means a bit of a lead time sometimes, but it means we don't have a warehouse full of kit to shift. We can move quite quickly with new technology, new opportunities, that sort of thing.
And it's all locally sourced, is it? Like, it's all in-house, or are you sort of importing?
It's always made to our own designs. We collaborate a lot with specifiers on the actual technicalities of the designs, but we work out how to make things ourselves, and we go and make it ourselves. We've got the equipment in-house to make just about everything, though when it's higher volume, we'll use local subcontractors to increase the numbers. For higher volume items. We've got our own paint shop. We don't do anodizing currently in-house. Glass work we don't do in-house, but we've got a network of people we trust, depending on what the requirement is.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because it was like what I found really interesting in our chat back at Light 23 was just to understand your philosophy, and there was a number of points we talked about. One was circular lighting, and I don't know. Is it because like you have that ability because like it's all in-house that could you talk a little bit about the circular lighting and what you're doing, because I find it really interesting, and it's certainly something that came up here last year. It seems to be we're in such a throw-out society now. It makes so much sense. It'd be great to hear a little bit more of what you're doing with circular lighting,
Yeah, well, firstly, I think circularity is vitally important, but it goes hand in hand with carbon appreciation, reduction of, first of all, understanding embodied carbon, in-use carbon, and then seeking to reduce that as much as possible, which overlaps hugely with circular economy, but they're not exactly the same thing. We try and advocate and practice behaviors and methods, designs that address the kind of sweet spot of all of that. Over the years, we've developed a sort of quadrant of values or factors that we take into account when approaching a design. Being a smaller business, making in-house gives you the ability address that quicker, I suppose. Not in our case anyway, quicker. Yeah, we can address supply lines, tweak designs and that sort of thing. You can, by making to order, you immediately reduce the amount of waste that you have either bringing in or sitting on shelves as finished or half finished kit, things like that.
Yeah.
So there's some easy wins, I guess, with our business model. Not to say that large businesses haven't got plenty of opportunity to find all sorts of efficiencies there through scale too, and or holistic ownership of supply lines. But for us, you know, we are who we are, and we've been looking at all sorts of areas in what we do to address that sort of thing. I mean, making things to last, that's a really easy place to start. And that's and it used to be a sort of necessity of how we made things. So the equipment we had to hand that we could afford meant that we would just build stuff in a fairly robust manner. Now we've tried to hang on to that. So making things to last, that's designing using good materials. The era of LEDs played into that a lot because thermal transfer of heat through solid lumps of metal, primarily aluminium. You know, that's the way to go. It's obvious, and it played into our hands there. That technology and the techniques have become a lot more sophisticated over time. But these sorts of things play into that. Now, your choice of metal in our case, or material, in our case metal, that metal being aluminium, understanding the embodied carbon of aluminium, understanding what kinds of aluminium there are, where they come from, how they're extruded, all part of the massive mix of information you've got to sift through to decide what you want to do. You know, there's costs involved with that too, different processes. Some are not within your gift to use, but then you start to looking at additive or subtractive manufacturing, the payoffs between pulling more resource out of the ground and having to then scrape it away from a component versus, I don't know, casting it or 3D printing it or whatever. So all that's part of the equation. But then, the design, if you can standardize components so that you've got one component can be used in different applications, that's also good for the bottom line. But it helps you to reuse things, trying to design stuff so that even if it's one thing designing with common components for a product or another product, but better still, if one of those products comes to the end of its usefulness, you can transfer some of the components into another iteration of that product without having to start from scratch. Doesn't need to even be recycled, you just reuse it.
So you're standardizing components, that makes sense.
Yeah, and commonality of sort of families of bits. Avoiding things like glues, resins where possible to that permanently fix components so that you can't refresh them, that kind of thing. Just good finishes that make things last a long time, protect materials, that sort of thing. Then you can start to look at what you do with the waste, minimizing that waste, and then when you do have unavoidable waste, what you can do with it. So we've been looking at things there too. And all amongst all of this, it's got the circular economy. It's not just circularity; it's got to be economic. It's got to wash its face to be viable. And so you've got this balance to strike there. It's no good if it only is very short term and you go out of business. So yeah, we've been looking at that. But also, what's really important is the greenwash is a terrible thing. It's a household term now, and any accusations or associations with that would be disastrous for any company. So we've been really careful to try and validate and quantify anything we're talking about. Doing it is one thing quietly, but if you're going to start talking about it, you really need to make sure that the evidence is there. So we've been right from it depends what you consider the early days, but from a good number of years now, we've been keen to seek out metrics that will evidence good behavior, good practice. So we've done a lot of work in that too, getting involved sometimes at the coalface of bedding in or stress testing new metrics, keen to adopt them, keen to understand which ones are suitable for what. Get involved in co-starting the Green Light Alliance, for example. That was all about this. to help the industry or help us to find metrics that you could adopt that people could understand and compare apples with apples. And then, your claims can have some sort of validity and be compared fairly in the market. So there's a whole load of stuff there, and in doing so, we found ourselves taking on an environmental scientist, well, a materials scientist who's trained into the environmental side of things. She's now our sustainability lead. Along that journey, she's been heavily involved with TM65, TM65.2 in particular, and TM66 for circularity.
We're also, they're the new circularity standards, are they, for CIBSE?
66 is, and 65.2 is a sort of slightly refined one specifically for the lighting industry. It's introduced some coefficients that give more accurate results. It's still a sort of mid-level LCA. We think it's really good, and when you use the two together, you get a really good data set for your product, and it's holistic too. You combine the circularity of TM66 and the embodied carbon of 65.2. That's a fair representation of your piece of equipment, and thankfully, because it's sort of backed and owned, driven by CIBSE, it's got a broad and quick uptake. So quite quickly, well, you've probably seen it too, plenty of manufacturers and specifiers are reaching for that to make these comparisons, to investigate these claims. So that's really good. There's even a verification facility come out of the Lighting Association to sort of validate those claims, so they're needn't be just self-tested.
So like in the past, it was like very difficult from what I've seen. Like we've been asked for product declarations and that type of thing, but I think it was quite an onerous thing for companies to do product declarations to, and there's obviously a whole host of standards and that type of thing. You think it's this you've been involved in development of this is really simplified? You think it's a model that can work, and it's simplified things, made it maybe more cost effective to do it?
It's definitely more affordable than full LCAs, never mind EPDs verified off LCAs. The CIBSE metrics are much more affordable to do. Now they are just self-certified, unless you do go take LIA up and have your TM66 validated. So they're definitely more affordable, quicker, and more manageable, but they're sort of mid-level. So it's a great place to start, and that's where maybe all you need, depending on who your customer is. Now, full EPDs, they remain a massive undertaking in time, resources and cost. We hesitate there. We're not by any means anti at all. We're pro, and some of our customers are insistent upon it, and we're actually looking at that to understand exactly what the red lines are that if you want to be considered for a project, where does that sit, and why is that? For us, more importantly, we want to understand which EPD, because there's a huge variety of LCAs and EPD verification agencies out there. All very thorough, very clever, and diligent, vigilant agencies. But it's difficult. Some people even argue impossible to get a very fair like-for-like comparison from two different outfits. So which one do you go for? And if you just go for an arbitrary one that maybe was based closer to your factory or cheaper or whatever the criteria you went through, how do you compare that one to another one? And if you're not using it for comparison, then really, why is everybody putting all this effort in? My view is ultimately to make decisions and make better decisions on product specification. That's obviously why we're interested in it. So which one do you opt for to invest all that time and money into? It's a big question, and we've been we are working on them. I know some companies, larger ones particularly, can afford to put big resources in, will adopt a particular agency and put a lot of products through it, and that's great. And there's a huge amount of data that's that's valuable, but how valuable is it in terms of comparing with another similar manufacturer that's done it through a different agency? It's not apples for apples. The people better qualified than me will happily go into the detail and the minutiae of that, and that's maybe another call which we could have with
Yeah.
my colleague. But yeah, what we're interested in is harmonization ultimately. Is that realistic to expect? I think so, and there's some encouraging steps. We're involved with Lighting Europe on in various capacities there, and one of which is to seek to establish, I suppose, an LCA program that would be harmonized and that multiple companies could adopt. We have to be careful because it's all work in progress at the moment, and where the exercises are at in terms of announcements and declarations. Not for me to say, but there's some promising progress there, I suppose. And for us and for the Green Light Alliance, we'd love to get to a point where there was a fit for purpose, agreed upon LCA with an EPD verification outfit, available, that was harmonized, that everybody could just use. So, you get absolute apples and apples comparisons. I hope we're not too far off that, because that's the first big step in my opinion. But then, it's not a mean feat to then go and put your product through that, whichever LCA EPD it is. But at least if you are going to be investing significant resources into that, there's more confidence that it's going to be universally recognized.
Yeah, and everyone's compared, like as you're saying, on the same standards and that. Is it the CIBSE one that you think is the one that the TM66 that might become the standard, or is it an amalgamation of things that you think?
No,
might
not at
do
all.
that?
I mean, the TM66 isn't an LCA.
Okay.
The TM65.2, I think, is termed a mid-level LCA, but a full LCA.
So LCA is life cycle assessment. So
yes,
yeah. So what's the difference? What's the difference then between
it's
what the TM66 is doing and
it's absolutely what's
we're
the
getting
term?
into technicalities here, are we?
It's unforgivingly grueling and invasively interrogates everything about your product and the manufacture process behind it. The TM65.2 is pretty good, but it's not designed to go to those levels. It gives you an answer with approximations and things in there, and it just gives you, I think, just a carbon dioxide equivalent figure at the end of it. But there's approximations and things made along the way, whereas a full LCA will give you embodied carbon figure, but it'll also give you, I think it's something like 11 or 12 other categories of resource depletion, acidification of oceans, water eutrophication, all sorts of categories, all sort of addressed and declared as part of a full LCA. So yeah, I mean that's.
I'm sure there's a balance there, though, is there? Because, like, as you're saying, it needs to be. It's admirable what you've done, what you guys have done, the effort you've put into to understand circularity. It resonates so much with me. It makes so much sense, but you need to, like, if the metrics that you're working to are so onerous that it takes so much time, you either need to recoup that by having a bigger demand. I don't know if you found it has led to a bigger demand, or you can charge more for your products, but there's like, as you said at the start, there's an economical sort of consideration on it, isn't there? It's balance.
Yeah, it is tricky, and I mean, we want to be as transparent as we can be. We feel that we will score favorably, certainly not, in the lower portion of the industry, when there is this arena that we're all playing, openly and evenly on. Maybe if we can get to that point. So we do want to do it, but we have to be realistic about the resources going in, and there's no two ways about it. This kind of the thoroughness needed for a full LCA just will take, you know, a lot
Yeah.
of man hours. It will take, you know, there's fees, there's databases you need to subscribe to, and then there's independent verification, which comes at a fair cost, and the communication during that process. It's time and money. I guess as volume goes up, you know, the amount of traffic and the amount that sector grows, it will probably come down in cost. But it's still going to be expensive. For a small company like ours, we'll just have to pick our way through and pick the products we can afford to do each month or each year strategically. I guess the bigger competitors that do higher volume of a narrower range, it's a bit easier. But then they've got different challenges, I guess, of how you would, you know, drill into your supply lines and that sort of thing. Yeah, it's yeah, it is onerous, and it's a challenge. But we've just got to start somewhere. What would be why we hesitate a bit before going too far into the full LCA route is because we would like to see some certainty of a sort of roadmap of a particular, call it a protocol, a standard, a harmonized metric that we can go down, knowing that we're not going to have to abandon that as a dead end and start down another one.
Okay.
But you know, we in the meantime we can practice, and we're learning on others. I kind of feel a hope that Lighting Europe is a route to that. And in the meantime, there's nothing holding back us or anybody else, I think, getting stuck into the CIBSE metrics, these sort of mid-level metrics, TM65.2 and TM66. There's still work involved, but it's more affordable. It's becoming a sort of a very good stopgap. Who knows? Maybe it becomes a sort of de facto.
But maybe it's a nice way to dip your toes into the water, you know, and to encourage sort of companies like yourselves to do that, you know, when it's digestible and more sort of economical from a time point of view, I suppose, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the way you go about creating products these days, the way we manage information these days, I dare say applies to most manufacturers. It does make transferring that information into you know, environmental data processing, yeah, a bit less onerous. But at that level, yeah, and I think the evidence is there, and not the best on seeing what other manufacturers are up to, but even the little we're aware of there, you see the TMs popping up all over the place, which is great because you've got at least an interim playing field where people are presenting comparable information, you know.
Is there a lot of manufacturers picking up on it, do you think?
I'm not the best to answer that question, but just anecdotally, you know, I'm top of my head, I probably think of half a dozen that I'm aware of. I guess it'll be filtering out from the UK. CIBSE's range does spill well beyond the UK, but I think that's where it's based, and it sort of reaches out from.
It's sort of like, to me, it strikes like the circularity thing. It's going back to how things were done, you know, years ago. I think you sort of alluded to that at the start. You know, I think that one that strikes me is that when our shoes were for our grandparents, when their shoes were damaged, they went back to the cobbler type of thing. Like, you've put in a 25, I don't know, is it a 20-year duty of care? And is the vision with, like, well, I suppose two questions. The vision with circularity is that you have that, you're looking down the line, so you know how long your product lasts, and that you're preparing for reuse, and then that you're sourcing your materials, sort of, I suppose, having that local supply chain gives you the ability to look down the road. Maybe encourages businesses like yours.
Yeah. Yeah, knowing your supply line, or being it for many components, owning the IP or having access to the drawings, much less chance of any of that becoming unavailable or delisted. So that helps. But you know, we're also, you know, we don't make everything. We buy in our LEDs or electronics, or cabling and that sort of thing. And you do quite regularly get burned by a product becoming delisted, or technology just moving on, and nobody wants to buy that anymore, or replace what they originally had in there with the same. They want something new in there. So that's a challenge. But being again, our business is okay at adapting, you know, pre-existing kits to take new technology. The 5-year duty of care, or we have a 5-year warranty, which we introduced a good while back. And then gradually we felt it was just appropriate to at least pledge further support on that, and put a number to that, put it down in writing. So 20-year duty of care. You could say it's a bit arbitrary. I mean, there's not much kit that wouldn't need intervention before then. Even the most underrun LED is going to need attention within 20 years.
Yeah.
But then when you've intervened, there's no saying you can't make it run for another, an LED, another 10 years, and then again. So we pick that number. But it's more about a statement of intent to support a product. We've looked at support services and that sort of thing, and maybe that will creep in. Lighting as a service doesn't really feel like us, and frankly, for much of that intervening period between original manufacture and remanufacture, you don't need us. You don't need to be paying us. You could do a subscription model, and that works for some. I totally appreciate that. But for us, there's no point. It's nice to keep in touch with customers, obviously, and great if they want to pay for that too. But there's really no need. When the time comes, we've got all the data on hand. Whatever technology is being considered for the new remanufacture at that point in time, let's go look at that. We then do a quotation based on whatever it needs to. The new technology, it might include remanufacturing at the factory, or within striking distance of the factory, we can actually come to site with a mobile workshop and do the full remanufacture recertification on site. And that's, so that's a parcel of work. And when that's done, well, you should be good for another 5 years warranty, but normally it's a lot longer than that.
So you keep a warranty after when you go back.
We thought there's no point in doing an intervention if you can't walk away from it saying it's as good as it was to begin with, or better maybe. So we renew that 5-year warranty at the when we do a renew intervention. Yes, it's gone well. We've kind of done this sort of thing for many years, sometimes just a sort of free, friendly service for the odd local job. Somebody came in, something they'd bent or broken or worn out transformer. Sometimes we'd have to charge for it, but it just sort of bubbled away in the background. And then with all this sort of soul searching and sustainability thinking, we've really looked into that a lot more, and it comes into the TM65 metric, for example. When you're putting your embodied carbon figure down, you put a date to it, and if you're saying 25 years, then you have to make an estimate of how many times it will be remanufactured in there, and add all those up to give you your total. So if you're starting to think about that sort of stuff anyway, then you think, well, what does that actual remanufacturing process look like? Well, it'd be good if it was us doing it, and not somebody else sort of cracking open our fittings. So yeah, it's just become part of life now. And actually, from when we formalized it until now, in the first year or so, it's become a reasonable chunk of the business.
So how does that look? Like your customer, are you getting calls from customers that you might have supplied to 10 years ago, looking for you to come back in? And are you then replacing? Because I know when LED came in, it sort of encouraged that throw-out sort of philosophy, didn't it, really? Because you could change the chips, you could change the bulbs, but you can't. So are you doing that, going back to
well, exactly that. The questions come from also, I mean, some it's people still got halogen going or T5s going and wanting to refresh those. Some it's early LEDs, and indeed they were some of the worst because we were all not guilty of gluing them in, although some components had glue in parts of them, which made you couldn't, no longer in the era of changing light bulbs, you had to prise out. Even with ours, with screw rather than glue, but you still, had to figure out how to do that. And it's not like just going down to a hardware store and picking up a lamp anymore.
They were designed to be thrown out, basically. Were they? Was that I'm not saying that you were designing it that way, but
consciously, I think we didn't. We, if we be totally honest, we thought too much about it, or hadn't really wanted to think too much about that, worry about that in the future.
I've got asked that question loads. Well, what happens at the end of the life? And you're sort of going, well, it'll last for a long time. That was the answer.
Showing some graphs of lumen maintenance, and next question. I don't know. The honest answer, probably a bit of both, a bit of denial, self-denial, and a bit of optimism, but also kind of knowing that should we have to, we could. You've just built them once. There's nothing stopping you unscrewing that PCB and putting a new one in. It's rarely that simple these days because the LEDs have moved on so much. You're probably putting in a COB module now rather than an array. But yeah, we've thankfully got to the solution to that problem before the problems properly manifest. So now we welcome it. It's great if you get a gallery that had an early LED track fitting installation calling us and saying, these are all going a bit fade, we're getting a couple of drivers falling over, can you look at it? If that happened, soon after they'd gone in, it'd have been, not relish the prospect. But now we've got a plan, we've got equipment, we've got processes, we've got better LEDs, we've got improved optics, we've got different controls options. So, yeah, we can, project by project, we sort of have a discussion and almost like a menu of options for the client to go through. And one of those questions is in situ with a mobile workshop, or send them back to us. So yeah,
that's brilliant. But I imagine it's definitely probably a case by case basis, because you're dealing with different technologies maybe, and you didn't design those products to reuse them. So hopefully the vision will be, with this circularity, that maybe when you go back looking in 10 years time, that it becomes much easier to do that retrofit type of thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't say we designed them with planning to ever intervene again, but everything's, can't think of any exceptions. Everything we've put together is Meccano built, Allen keys. You can pull it all apart, you can get to it, no matter how tricky that might be. So yeah, we've yet to be, I don't want to contradict myself, but we've yet to be confronted with an old product of ours that we couldn't remanufacture. Sometimes it's cost prohibitive. You can do it, but it's just too silly most times, and we pride ourselves on this. It's maybe not as cheap as people would like, but it's still definitely worth remanufacturing than throwing out and replacing. But yeah, I guess there are a few times where, although it's possible, so much has changed in the intervening years that you're better off just taking something new.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. The we don't have long, I suppose, left, but I was going to chat to you about because you've done a bit on circadian lighting as well, which is really, really interesting. Now it's going to be very hard for you to summarize it in a few minutes, but if you could just give us a quick insight into what you guys are doing on the circadian side of things, because I find that quite interesting.
Yeah, well, even the term circadian, I think that's the right term. It's wrongly used and overused. Obviously that's the rhythms within our bodies that that kick off all sorts of processes, and from lighting can impact that. In fact, lighting is one of the main inputs that do play, do affect our circadian rhythms. So yeah, we're trying to really, like with anything, understand it before we start mouthing off about it too much. At one level, just having a nice bright light or a dim light that has immediate and obvious psychological benefits, but this is about way more than that. It's about the physiological side as well as the psychological. So you need to stop, take a few steps back and get some books out, and then more books. And it's been a really interesting learning curve there. So to make meaningful intervention into your sort of well-being through lighting, there's an awful lot to learn, actually. And so we've been doing that. We're now at a point where we're even creating our own CPDs to help share that learning and merge the sort of scientific knowledge that's out there with the lighting knowledge that's out there, and where we think we're managing to contribute to that. So been working on that. We've obviously been working on a product to respond to that, and a bit tricky because you sort of want to get moving, but you need to do your homework first. But what you do your homework with, so we did some prototyping, some preliminary testing, and then we put one of the versions of the prototype out into the field for some field trials. Basically field trials to support or to test hypotheses about what the type of light and the threshold in terms of output was in order to affect mood, alertness, quality of sleep, all these sorts of things. There's quite a lot of data out there from clinical trials, but there's very little in terms of field trials with real world considerations or taken into account or not taken into account. Just and try. So we've finished the first round of that. We're into another round of them now. The results for the first round are coming out any day now. And yeah, interesting, encouraging. They were kind of modest in some respect. We took some of the variables from the light out, so we didn't play with color temperature, and we played with 2 different intensities. And to really understand the part within the spectral distribution of a light, a white light, and its impact on people, you need to be starting to talk about Medilux. So that's generally the bit that affects the non-visual part of your eyeball, the intrinsically photosensitive ganglion cells that we've been learning more and more about since they were discovered about 25 years ago or so. And so the part of daylight that affects that is at the bluer end. So it's I'm trying not to dive into that too much now. It's a huge topic, and there's so much to learn. But yeah, there's a part of this the spectrum that affects the non-visual part of your eyes, which you want to use. Basically, you want that at a minimum threshold for the early part to the middle part of the day. Later on in the afternoon, you want to drop that right down, and then later into the early evening, really drop it down until bedtime. You want it gone. And that helps cue up all the clocks in your body that need to set hormone releases and all these sorts of things that kick off routines around your body, from anything to do with insulin, melatonin, all that sort of stuff. So there's a well accepted paper, or a combination of papers been congregated into a piece of paper from what's known as the Manchester Group, with the in a nutshell, a Medilux horizontally delivered into the eye of over 250 is where you start to have impact. Below that, not enough. So Medilux, very crudely put, is about 2/3 of the average white light. It's way more complicated than that, and really you need to dive into the detail. But there's only a portion of it that of most white light that artificial white light that addresses that. So we did a test going from 150 Medilux up to 250 that was delivered one day to the other. You didn't know which you were getting. You can't really tell the difference, and people would feedback their experience based on that.
The laboratory test as such.
No, this was very much in the field. We just made sure that people weren't in the middle of a big bright space next to windows, because the impact of that would be unappreciated. So you had to be. We took basic tests of the ambient around, make sure they were low enough. I mean, most people, this is the fact, live in biological twilight, I think is the term. 90% of us work indoors or spend most of our time indoors in artificial light, and most of that below what's good for us. And the lighting industry, we've grown up measuring horizontally on the working plane. And looking at photopic lux, when really, if you're worried about people, these should be horizontally measured at the eye level, and using Medilux rather than photopic lux. So that's maybe a slightly more extensive explanation behind that. There's what is Medilux? How do we break that down? And maybe for another call. But the fundamentals of just changing the way we measure it, if you're worried about the health and well-being, circadian rhythms, as you say, then that's a shift in practice.
And just to digest it a little bit and summarize it maybe for people, but so it's the lux is what we measure light in light intensity, what we've always done in sort of lighting, but the light that takes us to see is different than white light's made up of all these wavelengths. So there's different wavelengths are more important for us to see functionally than the wavelengths that are important for us to tell our body what time of the day it is. And maybe is it the Medilux is based around those wavelengths that are important for setting our biological clocks, and maybe we've been measuring things without looking at the whole big picture. Would that be a way to interpret it?
That's having I mean, it's you can still see the light, you know, you can still see Medilux. It tends to be at the bluer end. So after the call, I could send over some slides that you could maybe insert with showing the difference between photopic lux and Medilux and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's appreciating that, really. There's no reason you can't have both. And we've got a CPD ready now, that goes into all of this and why it's important to understand and address for the lighting industry too, and how, you know, how we've begun to address it. So that's something that's a really useful tool. So we're about to start telling people about that and getting that CPD out on the road. Yeah, what was I saying? Medilux versus photopic. Yeah, the fundamentals of measuring vertically versus horizontally. That's a massive step. I mean, there's the 330, 300 rule of thumb about the value of, you know, energy use of lighting, infrastructure in a building. People is the 300, and yet we spend all of our lighting focus trying to shave a few percent off the $3 or €3, whichever, you know. Whereas if we could make the 300, the person, the most expensive bit and the most important part of the building, just a fraction of a percent more productive, you'd save so much more. You know, so there's a good argument for looking at how we do these measurements, why they were the way they were, what we could do to consider horizontal into the eye more. You can use a rule of thumb, just use photopic lux and convert it to Medilux. You can, if you know the LED recipe, you can convert it, or you just use a sort of rough rule of thumb of, say, 60%, something like that. Because most lighting in an office is, you know, downward facing, so you know, you get reflected and it bounces around. It's not all focused on the melanopic part of the spectrum, the Medilux part of the spectrum. So there's lots of things to consider, but it's fascinating to get in there. Trying to gather that up and make sense of it was this CPD, and we've got a product now that we're launching that addresses that in the workplace. At least gives you quantifiable control over the immediate light dosage coming onto a person, which is really interesting in itself. There's risk, you know, not risk aversion, change aversion, reticent to mess with, you know, the norms. It's funny that although we might be delivering, I don't know, a few hundred lux, photopic lux, maybe even 500, that people sometimes can be quite resistant to that, but they walk outside quite happily and step into 5,000, or is it nearly 50,000, you know, on a sunny day. And so, you know, managing that, you know, smooth dimming up, you can get your Medilux dosage from a very warm color temperature if you want, but it needs, depending on your LED recipe, but it needs to be brighter to get the same equivalent as you would from the same LED from a cold CCT. You could dim it down. So we've got, you know, we can demonstrate that quite nicely, because some people just have a preference for one or the other, and it is perfectly feasible to get all the healthy light, you know, get your Medilux dosage from a very warm color temperature. But you'd have to accept that there'd need to be, you know, higher flux coming in horizontally into your eyes.
It's definitely a whole topic, and you could talk for an hour or two on it, I think, because there's a lot to digest. But I suppose that the takeout is that there's a lot more to light than what we would have previously thought. It's a hell of a lot more complex. It's not just a functional thing. It's a hugely health thing, isn't it? You know, and it's sort of being forgotten about, or maybe poorly understood.
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe a bit oversimplifying, but you just need to remember that we evolved for tens of thousands of years outdoors, and then since the Industrial Revolution, we moved indoors, and then we've supplemented daylight for artificial light, and it's pretty clever what we can do. But it's, you know, if you look closely, it's not everything there, you know, the full spectrum. Oh God, you can go into UV and near red, infrared, all these sorts of things too, which you can't argue. That comes from the sun, and it doesn't from most artificial lighting. And then you've got windows and filtration, and so much going on there. But I think it's one of the big topics is this, you know, healthy lighting for people. And I feel like you can sort of round off this conversation almost by thinking the first part of it, we were talking about sustainability, circular lighting, embodied carbon, kind of, you know, planet, thinking about planet, resources, healthy light, we're talking about people. So you've got planet, you've got people, and then the other bit that we're just sort of starting to engage with more as a small company, it's we don't drive the technology, let's say, so it's harder, but is the other things on the planet, flora and fauna.
Yeah.
And we're talking a lot about that, getting involved a little bit here and there. There's only so much we can do, but I definitely see that's an area will be the next
Dark
trend of
skies,
focus. Yeah, dark
noise
skies.
pollution, light
Yeah,
pollution. Yeah.
low light and all that, and tailored bandwidth for particular species, whether that's badgers or fox. Bats is a common one, obviously,
Yeah.
and turtles on coastal regions, and all that. We've sort of all heard a bit about that, know a bit about that, but the more we learn, the less we seem to know they're
Yeah.
contradicting
Yeah.
bandwidths, depending on whether
Yeah.
it's a Mediterranean or a Red Sea turtle or West Coast America, or whether it's an adult turtle or a young turtle, or you know, we're very much listening in that front. We have been asked to provide kit to respond to it, but we let that be prescribed by others for the time being. Tell us, you know, optics, bug rating, and you know, glare design, that sort of thing, and tell us which bandwidth you're looking to hit and which ones you want to avoid. For the most part, we can seek to do that using tunable whites or dynamic, you know, split colors and that sort of thing. It's really interesting, and it's only fair that we do that as a species, I think, to sort of pay a bit more attention. But we've got the technology now to be able to be much more nuanced in our approach, and you know, the projects that have the budget for it ought to do it, I think, and it's interesting to get involved with that side of it too. So it's still emerging, and we're very much in the sort of listening role at the moment.
Yeah. It's it's so interesting. It's a very interesting time in lighting, I think, isn't it? You know, there's so much, I suppose, we didn't know what we didn't know.
Yeah.
And now we have so much to digest, and it affects us in much more ways than we could ever have imagined, I suppose, you know. No, listen, I won't hold you anymore, Dave, because I know you're sort of have to get in. You're probably under a little bit of time pressure, but incredibly interesting conversation. Well done on everything you're doing.
Thank you. Cheers.
Yeah.